Welcome to Stories Room. Enjoy listening and don't forget to subscribe. My name is Rachel, I'm 39, and I live in an old house inherited from my grandmother in Charleston, South Carolina. It's also where I run my own women's clothing and accessories boutique called Lavender and Lace, which I opened about 7 years ago. It's my personal project, hard-earned, carefully dreamed out, and gradually built into a successful venture. For the longest time, it seemed like my life was perfectly balanced. I'd been married to Brian, who's 46, for 10 years. He works in sales for a local company. At first glance, we were just another American couple with slightly different interests. I'm in fashion retail, he's in corporate sales. But on the surface, everything looked smooth, without any major arguments or drama. At least, that's what I thought until I received that fateful text. It arrived while I was setting up a new scarf display in my store, with customers around, leaving me no chance to fully process its meaning right away. My phone buzzed, and between suggesting a blazer to a client and picking out matching earrings, I glanced at the screen. "Rachel, I'm leaving. Tomorrow I'm flying to Hawaii with Chloe, my new girlfriend. She's half your age, so that should explain why I'm doing this. I've already emptied our joint account, so don't even try to get anything back. Hope your little boutique can support you and your fancy customers. B." I felt my mind go blank, but outwardly I stayed calm. I didn't burst into tears or make any sudden movements. I just finished the sale with the client, neatly packed her beige coat and silk scarf in our Lavender and Lace branded bag, and saw her to the door. Even though a cold wave of hurt and betrayal rushed through me, my hands never shook. When the door closed behind the customer and only my assistant Kendra remained, I quietly asked her to step out for a coffee and lock the door. Then I allowed myself to reread Brian's message. "She's half your age." I emptied the account. Each word felt like an icy barb, digging under my skin and striking right at my deepest insecurities. Yet here's what was interesting. I wasn't so shocked that I couldn't think straight. Over the past few months, I'd noticed how Brian started suspiciously staying out late, talking about business trips that never reflected in his paychecks, and how he came home with new cologne, one that didn't smell like anything he'd normally wear. He began obsessing over the gym and changed his phone passwords. All of it felt like a major red flag. A month ago, I'd opened a separate bank account in my name only, just in case. Yes, we had a joint account, but I'd made sure not to keep large sums in it. Most of my savings were in the boutique's business account, legally mine alone, and in my personal account, where I'd managed to transfer the majority of my money. I sighed and typed a short reply. "Good luck. Be happy." Then I put the phone down, letting my gaze wander around the boutique, the mannequins displayed in the window, the neatly organized shelves of designer bags. This store was my creation, born from my own effort and dedication, and Brian was about to realize I'd hardly be left penniless. But the feeling of betrayal still cut deep. That same evening, my friend and lawyer, Dana, called. A month earlier, I'd told her about Brian's sketchy behavior, and we decided that if things ever escalated, I'd be prepared. Dana helped me finalize all the paperwork to have the boutique's finances securely in my name. So, once I got his text announcing he was leaving, I immediately told her. "He's gone. Actually, he says he's flying to Hawaii tomorrow with a younger girlfriend named Chloe." He emptied our joint account, bragging that I'm left with nothing. Dana just snorted into the phone. "Congratulations, we were expecting this. We'll file for divorce and include financial claims. I'll be happy to use his written confessions against him." She asked me to collect all of our messages, receipts, anything that could prove Brian's plans. The firm buzz of the dial tone in my ear felt oddly reassuring. I wouldn't be fighting this alone, and I wouldn't be a victim. Sometimes fate nudges you to stay on your guard at just the right moment. Back home, sorting through a folder of documents, I recalled how 3 years ago Brian had suggested becoming a co-founder of Lavender and Lace, claiming we'd grow the business together. I absolutely refused since I opened the boutique before our marriage, and I was the one who'd funded it entirely. He'd gotten upset, calling me overly cautious and secretive. Who knew that caution was about to save me now? I barely slept that night, combing through receipts, statements, and messages. I remembered every little detail, like 2 months earlier, when Brian came home and smelled men's cologne on me. It was actually just a sample from my store, and he threw a jealous fit, accusing me of cheating. Ironically, he was the one lying about those business trips and taking someone else to fancy restaurants. But now it wasn't the time for moral judgments, it was time for proof. I woke up around 7 the next morning to my phone buzzing wildly. More texts from Brian. Don't you dare talk to my parents, they're on my side anyway. Chloe and I are leaving, we deserve this vacation. Don't think you can get the money back. Besides, maybe you should find an older guy, huh? Reading it was unpleasant, but it didn't shock me any further. I immediately called the bank to dispute the charges on our joint credit card. The operator sounded surprised, but once I explained I had proof that my husband admitted to spending our shared funds without my consent, their tone became more official. Please send us the screenshots. We'll freeze the card temporarily to investigate. Feeling a wave of cold satisfaction, I forwarded them my evidence and requested the account be locked so Brian could no longer access it. That would be quite the surprise at the airport, once he realized that his and Chloe's tickets to Honolulu were void. I could imagine how he'd scramble to pay with his credit cards, most of which were nearly maxed out. He'd taken out several loans for important things that never panned out. I didn't particularly crave revenge, but he forced my hand. Had he left without draining my account, maybe I would have let it go. But he deliberately tried to wreck my life while mocking my age and my business, so of course I used every method I could to protect what was mine. By about 10 o'clock, regular customers started coming in. The first was Mrs. Donovan, a longtime patron. She was chatting about new arrivals when my phone rang. Caller ID, Linda, my mother-in-law. Sorry, I told Mrs. Donovan I have to take this. It's urgent. And I stepped into the back room. Rachel, Linda's stern voice came through the line. What is going on? Brian told me you're acting vindicatively, canceling his vacation payments. He says you always controlled him and never let him breathe. I smirked. Linda, did he mention he emptied our joint bank account to run off with his 20-something girlfriend, leaving me with literally nothing? She fell silent for a moment, then mumbled. Well, he didn't exactly say it that way. He just said you're being cruel, cutting off his access to money, and he had no choice but to leave home before going crazy. I see, I replied calmly. But you can see the screenshots where he brags he emptied the account and calls me an aging hen. I'd like to point out that I wasn't controlling him, I was running my business. Linda's tone softened a bit. I'll talk to him. But he is my son, and I can't just abandon him. Of course, I said, but please understand, Linda, he betrayed me. If you want the truth, ask him why he spent our money on a Hawaii trip with another woman. I hung up politely and returned to Mrs. Donovan, apologizing as I helped her choose a matching scarf. Inside, however, I felt drained, and the day had barely begun. Meanwhile, Dana emailed me a copy of the divorce filings. We'd decided to move fast, file for dissolution of marriage, citing financial misconduct. Attached were screenshots of Brian's texts, bank statements, suspicious expenses, everything. The judge in Charleston County agreed to a preliminary hearing within a week, given the severity of the situation. The idea of a legal battle unnerved me, but I also saw how the tables were turning against Brian. He thought he could quietly siphon off our funds, yet here we were, about to go before a judge. Quite a few of our mutual acquaintances and his coworkers were learning the truth. Apparently, he hadn't counted on me fighting back. The night before the hearing, I closed my boutique early and went to my favorite bakery on King Street. I bought 2 chocolate pastries, one for me, one for Dana. We met at her office, and as we sat there, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Instead of dreading this scandal, I was relieved that everything would be laid out in the open. While Dana walked me through the finer points of the case, I realized how crucial it was to have a lawyer you trust. "Tomorrow is only the first step," Dana said, flipping through our papers. But given that Brian basically confessed to emptying the joint account for a trip with his girlfriend, this looks very serious. If he denies it, we have solid proof. I nodded, sure that I was doing the right thing. Early the next morning, I was at the courthouse. The sun beamed off the windows, the sky was cloudless, and my stomach churned with nervous tension. Outside the courtroom, I found Dana and chatted briefly with her. Then Brian materialized, accompanied by a young lawyer who looked hastily hired. Trailing a few steps behind him was Chloe, wearing pink flip-flops and a floral tank top, completely out of place in a courthouse. Brian locked eyes with me and sneered. "You think the judge will see me as a monster? This is your fault for never being the wife I needed." I scanned him, mid-40s, wearing trendy skinny pants that didn't suit him, plus a flashy printed shirt. He was clearly trying to look young, but it came off as sad. Chloe avoided my gaze, fiddling with her long nails. I doubted she knew what she'd signed up for when she followed him. The hearing itself lasted about half an hour. The judge reviewed the texts, screenshots, and bank transactions, then asked Brian directly, "Do you admit that you spent joint account funds on plane tickets, accommodations, and other personal uses without your wife's consent?" He stumbled, muttered half-denials, talked about his reasons. Eventually, his lawyer tried to dodge the issue, saying, "In a marriage, property is considered shared," but the judge shook his head. "You spent everything, leaving not even a dime for mortgage payments on a house that turns out to be your wife's inherited property pre-marriage. Legally, you had no right to deprive her of all resources, especially since most of those funds belong to her." The judge froze the remaining assets and prohibited Brian from using any joint credit cards until the final decision. He also scheduled a more comprehensive hearing for the divorce itself. As we left the courtroom, I heard Chloe muttering angrily, "We were supposed to fly out yesterday. Now it's all ruined. You said we could beat her easily." Brian glared at me while I walked away with Dana, ignoring him. While Brian's world crumbled, my work thrived. My customers, many of whom had heard whispers about our situation, news travels fast in a small city, rallied around me, shopping enthusiastically and offering words of support. One elderly lady, Mrs. Moore, confided, "Rachel, you're amazing. My ex-husband tried the same stunt on me, left me penniless back in the 90s. I'm so glad you didn't let him fool you. You're young, beautiful, and most importantly, smart." Hearing that lifted my spirits. I still had bouts of insomnia, anticipating the full divorce proceedings. But the boutique's steady success, with even a little uptick in revenue, kept me going. Linda, my mother-in-law, would sometimes call to say Brian was complaining that I was persecuting him. He claimed I painted him as a thief and was denying him his half of the business, forcing him to stay at a cheap motel by the highway now that all his credit cards were frozen. I spoke coldly. "Linda, he did this to himself. I'm only defending what's mine. Isn't that fair?" A long sigh, then silence. "I know, but maybe there's a chance of reconciliation?" she once asked. "No," I said firmly. "None." And that ended our call. Meanwhile, Dana was gathering even more evidence against Brian. We found receipts showing he paid for dinners with Chloe out of our joint funds, took money for so-called work travel that his company had never authorized, and more. We had every document confirming that lavender and lace was solely mine, along with the papers that showed I inherited the Charleston house before marrying Brian. Friends who used to think he was a model husband were shocked. Even his sister, Natalie, messaged me on social media. "Hey, Rachel. I'm ashamed of what my brother did. He told us you didn't appreciate him and that you drove him to another woman. But after seeing his texts and how he's acting, I realize he's been lying all along." Sorry for not taking your side sooner. I thanked her for the support. I wasn't looking for sympathy from his family, but appreciated that they recognized the truth. As the second hearing, scheduled a month later, approached, I felt more prepared. During that time, Brian's messages to me ranged from threats, "I'll make sure they take the boutique away from you," to attempts at reconciliation. "Don't you want to settle this quietly? Maybe I'll come back like before?" I never replied. I simply forwarded each text to Dana. The day arrived. Besides me, Dana, Brian, and his lawyer, there were several witnesses. 2 of my friends and one of Brian's ex-colleagues were there to testify. The colleague confirmed that Brian openly bragged about his young girlfriend and his plan to squeeze money out of me. The judge meticulously reviewed our documents, asked clarifying questions, examined the screenshots and emails. Brian looked far less confident than at the initial hearing, no more yelling, just a sullen silence. He probably sensed that the divorce outcome wouldn't be in his favor. Chloe didn't attend this time. Word was, they'd fought when she realized he couldn't pay for that lavish vacation, and she left him. In the end, the judge ruled. The house I inherited isn't subject to division because it wasn't marital property. The boutique, Lavender and Lace, founded and funded by me alone before marriage, is also not subject to division. The joint accounts Brian emptied must be restored. He's obligated to repay me in full. If he lacks the cash, he must either take out a loan on his own or work out a payment plan. Additionally, the court explicitly noted deliberate financial misconduct, meaning he was left with only his leased car and no other claims on my property. Walking out of the courthouse felt like flying. In the corridor, Brian's sister Natalie shook her head and said, "He made his own bed." I talked to him on the phone, and he still insists it's all a mistake and that you'll back down. But he doesn't get that the judge has already ruled. I just shrugged. Glancing behind me, I saw Brian glaring, his face a storm of anger. He muttered something to his lawyer. But I no longer felt hurt or rage. It simply didn't matter anymore. He chose his path. A week after the ruling, I learned Brian moved out of the motel where he'd stayed with Chloe and was temporarily living with his mother, Linda. She called, her voice full of frustration. "I don't know what to do. He keeps saying you stole his chances at a good life." I didn't argue. "Linda, let's be realistic. He stole from me. If you want to help him, that's your choice, but don't blame me." I barely had time for lengthy debates. My boutique was thriving. I'd just signed a contract for a new line of designer bags from a New York brand. Things were busy, and it comforted me that I no longer felt the uncertainty that had haunted me during our last 6 months of marriage. Some acquaintances told me Brian complained about his misfortunes. He'd gotten into more debt, trying to take out a loan to repay the joint account, as the court demanded. None of his grand ideas worked out, and his enthusiasm for the younger girlfriend had fizzled once harsh financial reality kicked in. Occasionally, small-town gossip reached me. Chloe supposedly had a new boyfriend, wealthier and closer to her age. Someone else claimed Brian might file an appeal. I just smiled, knowing we had so much indisputable evidence that any appeal would fail. He even texted me once. "You'll regret how you treated me. Remember how we used to dream of building a small business together?" As always, I didn't respond and forwarded his message to Dana. Bitterness and paranoia. That's all he had left. Meanwhile, I was done with the whole thing. In the meantime, I hired a new employee, a young marketing enthusiast named Zach. He boosted our online sales and set up great collaborations. In 6 months, our revenue rose by nearly 30%. Whenever I'd review the financial statements, I remembered how Brian called my boutique a hobby and just a silly women's store. Now, that silly hobby was supporting me and letting me plan a second branch of Lavender and Lace in a suburban shopping center. Never would I have guessed Chloe would walk into my boutique one day. It happened about a year after the whole fiasco. I was helping a customer pick out a hat when I overheard my assistant, Kendra, speaking politely. May I help you? Are you looking for something from the new collection? I looked up and saw Chloe, the same 20-year-old beauty Brian had supposedly left me for. Except now she looked exhausted, her gaze dull, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. When the customer moved away, Chloe approached and quietly said, "Hi. I just wanted to talk." A cold and somewhat pitying feeling crept over me. I gestured for her to follow me to our small sitting area, a couch and coffee table where customers can sip coffee while they try on merchandise. Kendra politely stepped away, leaving us alone. I was so naive, Chloe began. I believed him when he said you were controlling and that he had no freedom. He told me you had no feelings for each other anymore, that you basically drove him into my arms. And we thought we'd go to Hawaii, like some dream vacation. I stayed silent, listening as Chloe nervously fiddled with her purse strap. Then it turned out he didn't have any real money. His card's empty. We ended up renting a tiny room. All he ever did was trash talk you, blaming you for taking everything in court. But he was the one who drained your account. Then he wanted me to give him money to take you back to court. I gave a wry smile. And how did that end? I left. I can't live with someone who lies around the clock. I'm sorry, She looked down. I'm sorry I believed him and played a part in all that. Did I feel anger toward her? Not really. More pity for a young woman caught in his web of lies. I exhaled softly. We've all made mistakes. I hope you've learned something from it. Chloe nodded and left. I sat there for a long time, absorbing how radically life had changed. Once I'd been jealous of her, and now she looked like someone he had hurt just as badly. In this story, everyone learned their lesson. A few months after Chloe's visit, Dana told me Brian tried once more to reopen our divorce settlement, claiming I had hidden assets or secret earnings. The court dismissed his claim, citing lack of new evidence. Another defeat for him. Through acquaintances, I heard Brian was still crashing with friends or at cheap motels, working odd jobs. His former company fired him for repeated absences and misconduct. Apparently, he'd been bringing Chloe to the office, violating corporate rules. Attempts to find a better job were fruitless, thanks to his shady reputation. Sometimes I felt a twinge of pity for him, but recalling how cruelly he'd acted, mocking me, trying to leave me with nothing, any sympathy vanished. I had no reason to rescue a grown man who'd treated me so harshly. Life was much calmer without him. I focused on the boutique's expansion, opened a second branch near the Charleston airport, and hired 2 more sales associates and an accountant. I even dreamed of further growth, maybe branching into Atlanta or Miami. Occasionally in the evenings, I took out our old photo album. There we were on our 5th anniversary, hugging, smiling, as if everything was fine. I didn't feel any pain looking at those photos, only a sigh for what might have been. Because the man Brian had become by 45 bore no resemblance to that younger guy in the photos. Time passed, and local media outlets started reaching out. They'd caught wind of the woman who protected her business from a husband who tried to take everything. As it turned out, my friend Dana had mentioned my case on a legal forum, and people were curious about how I'd safeguarded myself. At first, I hesitated. I'm not big on publicity. But I eventually agreed to an interview, explaining honestly, sometimes you have to be prepared, even when you love someone. Because love doesn't negate common sense. And it's crucial to keep proper paperwork, bank statements, and legal ownership of what you build. The article gained traction, and many women from around the state wrote in, thanking me or asking how to start a business or avoid falling victim to a duplicitous spouse. I replied, uplifted by their stories, feeling that my experience was helping others. Exactly 1 year after our official divorce, I celebrated, not by grieving, but by opening the 3rd Lavender and Lace location in an upscale area called Mount Pleasant. Friends, business partners, local designers, and Even some of Brian's former coworkers who supported me came to congratulate me. Standing there with a glass of champagne in the spacious showroom, I realized I had endured the storm and come out stronger. Another year and a half passed. My boutique had grown into a small chain of 3 stores plus an online presence with decent profits. I still lived in that old house I'd inherited from my grandmother, now filled with new memories. As for Brian, the last I heard, he was working as an insurance agent, moving between friends' couches and cheap rentals. His fling with Chloe had ended long ago, along with his fantasies of quick riches and a carefree lifestyle. Sometimes people ask, don't you regret those years you spent on him, or didn't you ever want it all back? I just smile and shake my head. My marriage to Brian is part of my history. It taught me to be more independent, more observant, and braver. If he hadn't tried to deceive me, I might have gone on living in the illusion of a reliable husband. But his betrayal forced me to face reality, and I became stronger for it. I have a rewarding job, a devoted team, and customers who value my taste and the quality of our goods. I'm free with a broader horizon for my life. On some evenings, I'll sit with a cup of herbal tea on my cozy front porch, looking out at the quiet Charleston streets, and feel a deep peace. Any pain I once felt because of Brian turned into a lesson and a stepping stone to something more genuine. Yes, he tried to destroy my confidence. Instead, it all backfired. I unlocked my own potential, built a thriving network of stores, and became an example for those in similar situations. And if anyone asked me the biggest takeaway from it all, I'd say, never underestimate your own resilience and always protect what's rightfully yours. So that short, cruel text Brian sent me on a completely ordinary day ended up being not the end, but the beginning of a new life, far freer, happier, and more promising than anything I'd had before. That's the end of our story. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on new stories and share this video so others can discover these great stories too.